that you started off by talking about producing salvation, and the more you describe this new ontological view of liturgy, the more it sounded like a factory producing something. And is that part of the immanent power, officium of the apparatus, that eventually it ends up being even spiritual, ethical, moral intangibles become products that are output by this mechanism?
It's both, because as I told you, it's also a transformation in the conception of being. So, what happens there, that the conception of being is shifting in direction of the idea of a productive process, something that works and will produce something. And so it's really a great change. But there is this idea in liturgy and in Christian. For instance, you see, what is a prayer? It's a complex phenomenon which examined by many points of view, but usually, for instance, anthropologists will look to them as an oral rite meant to have effect on the gods. No? So a prayer is a way in which men try to produce an effect on God. For instance, obtaining something, obtaining something. So it has what we say, a theurgical effect. It's a theurgy. So there is something, there's a technique for producing the effects.
But as it goes up closer to our time now, it gets more and more profane, but that process remains. And do you see a connection between that process and the de-ontologization of subjectivity in modern? You're mentioning them in terms of the modern anthropologist looking at the primitive person and seeing his own de-ontologization of the subjectivity. Is that because of this apparatus that's developed?
It's a complex question. Perhaps. It's not easy to establish the clear connection. But perhaps if being becomes a question of spirituality, then being is also weakened in some way, because now it consists entirely in its effectiveness, in its work, so that perhaps the position of subjectivity is weakened, is threatened.
Well, in the United States, when you go to a party, people say, "Hi, what do you do?" Because now that's what you are, and that's your office. You are your office.
Or your profile.
Yes.
In response to and this also, I guess, brings in sort of what I'm seeing as an Americanness.
More loud and more clear.
Sorry. You're talking about this, anthropologists projecting a sort of, a collapse of consciousness. Their subjectivity is different. I think that's how you can see how Americans have seen communism, the Soviet history, and Marxism in general is still anathema. And I would sort of say that by approaching subjectivity and being through this switch from the Greek to the Latin way of thinking it, we can sort of somehow sympathize more with where Americans are coming from with that repulsion about Marxism, because the way we see it is that it's this idea of workers of the world unite is a moment in which you literally conflate subjectivity in effect, like office, officium, or being in effect, this sort of what works being together. People's subjectivity is what they are, their work, whatever works, and the question is, who are they working for, what are they working towards? These are questions that scare Americans who are still so committed to the, as you say, like Latin
And that's very easy. What's the relation to the Marxist communist problem? So they projected something on them?
Yeah,
What is
I think we project, we see it as a sort of mass or mob, a collapse of consciousness in which subjectivities are lost to questions of work, in which it's almost, I mean, they're deeply related, obviously. If we see everything as work, what you do, who you are, how effective are you, if we see everything in terms of productivity, Marxism is a kind of symptom of that, one that tries to break free of it, but does it actually make it worse.
The funniest thing I can remember about this relation between American and communist, the American idea of a communist, is a story that was told to me by a great friend of mine, much older than me, who was a Spanish poet, José Bergamin, who had done Spanish Civil War. And as an intellectual, the Republican sent him and the poet Rafael Alberti, they sent both of them to the United States in order to have some support from it. But they were stopped when entering, and there was an interrogation from the officers, and this friend of mine was had to pass through a long interrogation because he was a communist. They were supposed to be communists because they came from the Spanish Republic. And then after 4 hours of discussion, my friend told him, listen, because he was not a communist, he was by chance a Catholic, Republican but Catholic, not Catholic. So he said, listen, I am not a communist, but what you think that a communist is, this I am.
About the common community in relation to Adorno's the culture industry.
In relation to?
Adorno's idea of the culture industry.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly...
Can you speak louder and slowly?
Sure. Sorry. You use a term, whatever. This whatever being. And I'm wondering if this term finds a kind of crack in the wall. If Adorno wants to say more than he in fact does in negative aesthetics, if that is what you mean by whatever.
Mm-hmm. So you ask what I mean by whatever?
Yeah.
That's stated in the book. So, now, first, it's, as I say, Michel, is a zone of indifference between the universal, the general, and the particular. So it's the whatever is neither the general nor the particular. And then this idea of, I underscore the Latin term for whatever, quod libet, which contains the term desire, libet. So it's not a neutral term. But then, why do you ask this in relation to Adorno?
Well, I'm wondering if...
Then in that moment I was very optimistic when I wrote this book, and then I thought that whatever being, of course, is the singularity. So I have a kind of hope in the new whatever singularity, and perhaps I was too optimistic.
I guess I see a little. I see a relationship between your interest in desubjectivizing, between your interest in desubjectivizing and Adorno's negative aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And
In which sense? Yes, perhaps. In which sense?